GM friends, and welcome to the Future of Gaming. You're listening to our bi-weekly podcast. My name is Nico Vereecke. I'm joined by someone you might know if you listen to this more often, Devin Becker, and then two new faces, Sam Barberie and Mike Levine. You know better what we're going to be talking about by the title and the description of this podcast, because, as you know, we set a direction and then we see where we end up. And then if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and make fun of my mustache. This is with purpose. I'm going to Slush, and I want to have a beautiful mustache by Slush, so I'm prepping. If you're going to Slush as well, and you're male, or you can grow a mustache, then grow it, and then I'll buy you a beer. There you go. Good. Before we dive in, let's do some quick backgrounds. I think that's going to be useful if we have new listeners. So just a brief background of who you are, maybe what you did in previous lives and what you're doing today. Devin, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. I'll just keep it real short since a lot of people probably have heard this before. But basically, I'm just I'm doing some stuff with NAMI that I co-founded, doing game analytics for Web3 gaming, doing a lot of writing for Naavik, which is actually public now that it's not behind the Naavik Pro paywall. So hopefully you're seeing that in the digest. And then also run their weekly roundtable podcast. So a lot of writing, talking, and analyzing and consulting.
Good. Sam?
Hey, I'm Sam Barberie. Right now, I am head of strategy and partnerships at Horizon and Sequence. Been in gaming and interactive media my whole career. Used to run, or was part of the founding team of Super Data Research. So some crossover with Devin's world, business intelligence and consumer insights on. We covered everything: digital games, esports, gaming, video content. Got acquired by Nielsen back in 2018. Stayed at Nielsen for a while. Co-founded a couple companies, and then fast forward to joining Animoca, where I was running one of their subsidiaries called Quid, and then met the team at Horizon earlier this year. Fell in love with everything that they're doing, and I'm very glad to be here.
Fantastic. Mike?
Me. I'm Mike Levine. Hi. I've been making games. I was just trying to do the math, I guess over half my life at this point. But yeah, I started working in games in the 90s at was Lucasfilm Games, and it became LucasArts pretty quickly. Now it's Lucasfilm Games again. Life's weird. And yeah, after having a great run there, did a startup with people from ILM for a few years, creating like software. Decided that I miss games, and as I moved back to the East Coast, started my own companies and been making our own games and games for big clients like Hasbro and others over the years, and always seem to be riding the bleeding edge of tech because that's what I gravitate towards. So we had a great run for a while doing AR games and then VR games, and then discovered Web3, and here we are.
So maybe just to dig into that a little bit more, what's a company called you're building Web3 games in, and what kind of game are you building?
Yeah, sure. So the company's called Mystic Moose, and the project is called Planet Mojo, which I can get into. And our first game is Mojo Melee, as I'm wearing my hat, as a good CEO should, with branding. And yeah, the game is our first. We're building an ecosystem of interconnected games where people who own the digital collectibles, NFTs, can use them in our other games as they come out. So Mojo Melee is an auto chess battler where we really love this genre. We had made a game with Phil Tippett back in 2017. It was Apple's Game of the Day, where we were experimenting with AR, and we sort of watched the genre evolve. And so when we had a chance to make our own, we loved the games, but we sort of put a new spin on them because, the best games in the genre, TFT, it's hard to say anything bad about them because we love them. But as a mobile experience, matches can take 30 to 40 minutes. And so we wanted to make something a little more digestible that you could play on the go, but still have that progression and mechanics. And we sort of combined deck building mechanics from TCG games with auto chess to kind of create a new strategy type in these genres. So yeah, happy to talk about it more.
Maybe just an observation from my end. I've always been extremely impressed with what Marvel Snap did to the trading card genre, and just it basically understood that the attention span of people, especially on mobile devices, has reduced to sub 10-minute levels, and managed to build a game around that. And so I think that general strategy, they pulled it off very well. Although still, I think the monetization might be suboptimal. But is that a bit of how we should see this? Like what Marvel Snap did to TCGs you're trying to build for the auto battler genre?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a game we've definitely looked at. There's no question about it. And yeah, I think that's a good analogy. We wanted to make something. Our game is cross-platform. You can play it. We're big proponents of web-based games. So that's where we started with, and we're now just bringing it to mobile. Actually, it's been in beta on Android, and we're this close to bringing it out to iOS, hopefully. So we're really excited and playing it on mobile. I mean, it was, even though like all these months, most people have been playing it on the web, but it really was designed as a mobile game. So it's kind of, interesting being cross-platform and just seeing the different play patterns, because you can definitely play it still for a long time. You're just playing in these more 5 to 10 minute bite-sized matches. And, we put in battle pass and sort of conventional modern methods, in terms of free to play and progression, which a lot of these games actually lack, currently, the auto chess games. So we tried to make it more accessible, and what, if you're not like, because this genre has some hardcore fans, right? But we wanted to have those people be able to play it, and we've had TFT players all along giving us feedback, but we wanted anyone who picks this up who'd never even played this genre to be able to get into it. So that was kind of our balance and goal we were going for.
Amazing. Sounds like there's a ton to dig into there. But the goal of this conversation was to focus perhaps on some of the new evolutions we've seen within the Web3 gaming space. And so let's start chatting about that. Sam, do you want to set the stage for the rest of our conversation?
Yeah, definitely. So, my kind of diatribe about, particularly the Web3 gaming space has been that, and I think this is true across the history of gaming with every new cycle of innovation, is that, where people play games, how people design games, goes lockstep with the technology that's available. And obviously, we can take this back to the earliest digital games, then the earliest mobile games, the earliest free-to-play games. Every step of that was, hey, what are my payment options? What technology works on what kind of devices? How do I make this most accessible to players? And so we just rinse and repeat that cycle. And so, if we think of games that launched in Web3 gaming, let's say in 2021, a lot of them had no choice but to kind of overly lean into being Web3 titles, because there was no way to hide that aspect from players. So it's like, hey, my addressable audience is a couple 100,000 degens at best. Therefore, I really better go hard on speculative assets and a certain kind of game design. But obviously now, and of course I can talk about it from the perspective of Sequence and the tech that we have, but being able to really abstract that away from players, not only in the onboarding, but making sure that Web3 tech can go where the best games live, which is, Mike first built a browser game, and I'm interested, to hear your thoughts about, how you thought about where to go with mobile. But a lot of Web3 infrastructure was so browser specific. But we know that the biggest games on the planet live on mobile. They live in game engines like Unity and Unreal. And if the technology at the time doesn't let you do that, then again, there's a design choice of, okay, I'm building for a browser-based game, and there are implications around that. So now, if you open up the Pandora's box of, hey, build any game you want, launch it on any platform that you want, obviously like asterisk for what they'll allow in terms of Web3, and we should talk about that too. But you're only hamstrung by creativity at this point. And I think we're on the cusp of, people being able to build absolutely whatever they want in this space. And that's why, so excited about what Mike is building. But a lot of the new wave of titles that, hey, they're just going to look and feel like really, really great games.
From what I've seen with this cycle that we go through, like with every new platform and technology, like you're describing, where we're like start with like the most rudimentary games and then work our way up to more real-time games. Like we saw this with Facebook games, we saw this with mobile games. Like every platform goes through that same cycle of like, let's start with super like low, like transactional kind of games, like turn-based, asymmetrical, and then work our way up towards more real-time. One thing I noticed with the mobile side of things too, like that relates, I think, to this is sometimes it's also parallel technology happening at the same time that helps enable it. Like where it's like the example being one of the problems with mobile games, right, was networking, where basically real-time games were difficult to do because if you were playing on a phone internet connection and it wasn't Wi-Fi, you were dealing with constant problems with intermittent like connection, phone calls disrupting it, things like that. But that as that side technology got better, we got all the way up to like 5G and things like that, the games can be more real-time and more real-time and more real-time. So it's like, I guess the question is there other parallel technology besides just, the blockchain themselves or the wallets like evolving alongside that we're also kind of like having to sort of wait for as it goes forward, because we can't like push everything forward as like one big thing?
I mean, on the browser side, I can talk about that because there's definitely some themes there you mentioned. And, I think one underlying theme that both of you guys were talking about here is friction, right? And how do we remove friction? And that's one reason we chose browser to begin with, is because there's just less friction. One, just for any player, you're right into a game. There's no download, find the app, that kind of stuff. But WebGL, it's not without its issues. But we've heard rumors that WebGL might be getting better soon and advances in that. But beyond that, there's this thing that most people haven't even heard of, at least in my conversations, called WebGPU. It's something that Google is heavily behind, and Unity as well. And we've spoken to them about it. And it's something we're taking a very, very serious look at. People might remember, if you've been around long enough, you've got gray hair. No, it was only about 10 years ago, right? Sites like Newgrounds and Congregate and Addicting Games, they had a much more dominant force in gaming, right? And what happened? Mobile phones came out, free to play happened. Steve Jobs killed Flash on mobile phones. He did that very intentionally. And those sites still exist, by the way. We're actually going live on Congregate today with our game, and we're already on Addicting Games. And it's just the model has changed a little bit, but we see a potential shift back to browser games and those platforms being powerful again, and having cross-platform games and central code bases. That's like the dream of developers. So yeah, I think there's a lot. Tech is always evolving. And as I've been saying a lot lately, like evolve or die. That's very important in this space, because what we thought we were going to be a couple years ago is completely evolved and changed.
So just to sorry, Sam. So just to maybe dig into that a bit more, I heard that Facebook used a non-native, like browser-based approach for a long time, and the moment they decided to make the switch, they saw their retention and engagement levels skyrocket. And so, I guess my question for you, Mike, is in general, it feels like there's always been a trend towards like better user experience, and like going back has never been where things went. And so how does the native mobile experience versus the more browser-based mobile experience differ in your view, and is that really a trend that you expect to see grow in the future?
Well, it's going to grow, I think, for sure. And I definitely don't look at it as a step backwards. It's a step forwards, but we need the tech to evolve. We need it to permeate through all the current browsers. We need Apple to get on board, of course. But today, you're absolutely right. You can't compete. The a downloadable game or an app, where you're native or, tapping right into it versus like, our game, for example, the browser version, you have to play on the desktop. You're not playing that on a mobile device, right? And so that's what you see with a lot of these web portal gaming sites too, is the sort of best games, they're sort of funneling you really to the app. The websites are kind of feeders. As I was doing research, I was surprised, like there are some pretty big games that exist on these sites. Subway Surfers, fully cross-platform web version. I was like, wow, okay, but not everybody, but I think there's something still there. And just like when any new medium arises, right, like the old one doesn't disappear. Like people were listening to radio for a long time until Sirius came, right? Or people still watch TV, and so the app stores are not going to go away. There's no question. But I think when people start to see console PC experiences in their browser that they can just bring up instantly, you think about it, like we have these PCs that have incredible power, and then we end up we still use the browser for everything, but it's crippling really what the greater PC can do. So that to me is going to be a huge step forward, in this space, but it's going to take time, and you're still going to see, apps exist for these games just like you do now. I mean, you want to be on any platform, that is engaging and has users, right? So I think that's going to be important. But you even see now, look at Google Play, right, with their PC store. I think that's really interesting, how and you see Supercell getting on board there, and something we definitely want to be a part of, because that's like, it's not browser based, but it's sort of like a step towards cross play and sort of unified, playing with just the same app essentially on different platforms.
I think it's worth pointing out too that Google's a big part of that, in all of that. The browser, the mobile platforms, bringing it to desktop as opposed to Apple, like, is a huge difference in what you're talking about between those two, because Google is more than happy to push like the new browser tech that runs all that stuff. They're also the ones that were trying to push instant play gaming sort of stuff through the store. Mm-hmm. So like they're big on this sort of thing because they don't have like the same stake that Apple does. And so I think we might not see that sort of thing like that you're talking about really happen so much on Apple side of things, more so Google and Windows side of things.
Mike, I wanted to ask you, two parts. One, sort of thoughts around progressive web apps. I think particularly in our wacky world, like Friend Tech got sort of a lot of attention for that kind of solution. And, with our game Skyweaver, it's both a native mobile app. It also is a progressive web app or browser. So one, how you've thought about that, but two, and maybe this is kind of for everyone, like I've always felt that gamers really have a hard time with like context switching. So you take a certain game, you put it on a certain device and platform, and it gets pretty ingrained. Everything from the design to obviously the ergonomics of the controls, but even around monetization. Hey, I am fine spending $70 for a game on PlayStation, but if that were a mobile game, obviously not. It has to be free to play. And so, how does that play into how you think about design and pricing and everything else when you take the same game and you start to go cross-platform? Even these subtle differences of cross-platform, of like native mobile app versus mobile browser versus progressive web app.
I mean, I think a lot of that is like what I was saying in terms of like legacy stuff remains, right? Because like if you look at kind of the biggest games right now that are cross-platform, like Genshin Impact and the 25 clones that it spawned or whatever, like those are free to play cross-platform games, right? And clearly there's an audience for that. And I think like just like we saw on mobile, I think it's just taken longer, but free to play is creeping into the PC world too. And I mean, it seems to me that's going to be the model going forward. There's always going to be titles you can pay for and things like that, but like you're saying, like it has to be sort of in sync, right, for the player. And like, you can't have this like paid experience here and then like a totally different play pattern, and it just gets very complicated. It obviously has been done, but the way we look at cross platform is you want to have that same experience. Like when you're on the go, you take out your phone, you want to get into a few matches, but you coming home, you know, maybe you want to play it on a big screen on your TV in the future, you know, that kind of stuff. Why not? Like, just wherever you are, you should be able to kind of, or what platform you like the best to play on, right? And have those options. So, yeah, I think, you know, so, and back to why we started here, right? At the beginning, right? It was a lot easier, we felt, for a Web3 game to tap into Web3 aspects in the browser, right? Like MetaMask was kind of you had to support MetaMask, right? And so, and, you know, now that we're working with Sequence, and everything really has changed, you know, and so things have gotten much easier to onboard users now, and mobile, which was just like, oh, forget about mobile and blockchain, you know, and there was Apple and Google. And so, like you said, so much has changed since we've started from the policy side and the tech side, that now we can really onboard the masses. That's why we've always been bullish on mobile long term, right? And we're building this cross platform. We're going to support both, but mobile is kind of, to me at least, the gateway to the masses, right? And we've definitely changed our like design and our philosophy on like how invisible should this be, you know, like how much do players need to know about this, or, and it's something we're constantly debating, honestly, because it's like, if it's, I'm probably gone way off the rails here, but sorry, if it's completely invisible, right, which is a great way to onboard players, but it's also like, then they don't even know what's happening, you know, like there has to be some I hate the word education, but there has to be some information, right, at least to let players know what's going on. And you know, the rub is, right, as we release this in the app stores and everything, like if we don't have Web3 in our game, like you're just a normal game now, right? Like you're competing with the thousands of games that come up. So this was our special thing, right? And for a while, especially in like, let's say, you know, the super dark era there with FTX crash, it's just like everyone was kind of asking themselves like, boy, you know, how much do we want to distance ourselves from this? Gamers, especially in North America, they hate this right now. But we kind of held, you know, we went through that. We held our ground, and honestly, like, we believe in it more than ever now. And it's really like, that's what I've always said, like the next 6 to 12 months, as more and more apps come out and end games, we're going to see different methods of how people present this to players. And you know, I think, like I said, there has to be some level of upfrontness about it, because there are some people who are excited about it, right? And we do get questions all the time, even on mobile, like from Web3 players, like, hey, how can I connect this? You know, more advanced than we expected. Like even with the deal we did with Amazon and Prime Gaming, like we're like, okay, these are all going to be like Web2 people. Oh no, you know, even with using Sequence and just so easy onboarding, the hardcore people, you know, they're still like, can I get this into my MetaMask? You know, I want, and that's fine. That's what blockchain is. That's why we like Sequence and the compatibility and, you know, EVM nature. So, yeah, I'll
Yeah,
stop rambling now.
no. But I mean, first, you know, I have to jump on like the North America thing, just because, like, obviously this is a constant refrain for me, but I'm sure you guys feel the same. Like, it's just, I don't know if this is a PG-13 or R-rated podcast, but like, it's
Go
so
ahead, man.
fucking exhausting to have players pull out literally word for word the same lines as the early days of free to play. This is a scam. This is a cash grab. And guess what? It was the Asian publishers that innovated first, along with some, you know, studios in Western markets that like really figured it out. And then everyone in the West had to play catch up, and all of a sudden it was like, oh man, I'm going to spend $100 a month on FIFA Ultimate Team. And then now we come back around and it's like, guess what? FIFA, shuts down every year. You have to start all over and buy the same shit, or Psionic shuts
talk about a
down,
scam.
secondary skin trading, or just, like everywhere you look, you have players complaining about something that, my hot take is, hey, Web3 solves this from a couple angles, right? There are tech and server implications, there are legal implications, like money transmitter licenses. There are just all these things that publishers don't want to have to worry about, that the blockchain can help with. But I think to your point about uh, let's call it education, but I think again we're at the point where you can abstract everything away. So the danger is, how do I make sure that I haven't just built a Web 2 game, even though you can, but what's the thing that's going to be the novel game design on top of that? And one of the things in terms of like cross-platform gaming that I think has been underutilized, and I'll just like lob this out there, but is kind of like secondary, like game adjacent experiences. So like I'm battling on browser or on console or whatever it is, but when I'm on the subway, I'm actually kind of engaging in more like a collectible card game. Like I'm managing my rankings and my assets. And again, I think the blockchain is interesting for that because it lets me engage in a entirely different kind of game meta, that is maybe secondary to how I would play on another platform. And Mike's gone.
Well, one thing that you guys kind of were, one technology, I guess you guys have been dancing around a lot of the conversation that I think is worth addressing is money and payment systems, because they're different across all the platforms and they factor hugely into this stuff working. So like obviously like blockchain, money works very differently. Mobile, money works pretty differently. Desktop or even web browser, like you go to buy something on the web browser and if it's not through Web3, then you're using PayPal. And so like an example experience, I was playing Marvel Snap on, I play it on my phone all the time. And I like to play it on my desktop now too, because the Steam version got pretty good. But I went to go buy something the other day and I was like on the Steam version and it just felt weird. It felt weird using their payment rails, and it was like 4 steps instead of like 1 to buy it. And I felt like, should I even buy this on here? Because now I'm not going to get the Google Play points that I can use to get discounts in the future. Like I'm wasting my money right now by buying it on here and having to go through this process, even though at the end of the day, they were actually both using PayPal as the actual processor. It's just different. And it's like you go to the browser and you go through MetaMask and then like trying to get like US dollars into crypto, like which can't ever really actually happen. Like it's sort of just like mirroring at best with like stable coins. And so like all these payment systems are a huge part of this technology and why it works. But then like even the differentiation between mobile and desktop, like Diablo is a great example where it's like you have Diablo, people treat money and buying things differently. You say, oh, you can't charge, a premium for a mobile game, but also the flip side where like they try and do like live service stuff on Diablo 4. People are like, this isn't Diablo Immortal. You can't do that. But on Diablo Immortal, it's fine. And it's this like the mentalities you talk about, that context switching, like it all like revolves around a lot of this payment processing stuff. And that's one of the big things that blockchain brings is supposedly new payment processing technology, but it's all very like still like we're talking about the topic of technology trying to catch up and make things more smooth. And obviously like, it's one of the things you guys are trying to address, Sam, but it's still a little bit problematic. And that was a big innovation Apple made where their payment processing was really smooth. And that's why they felt justified in charging 30% of that, right? Because they're like, hey, we made it super easy. Therefore, now we deserve some of this money. Obviously, blockchain stuff tries to do some of that with like royalties and other stuff. But it seems like this is a big topic that's still like going to be a thing for a while because money revolves around a lot of this stuff, especially when it's scams and crypto.
So something that Mike said that I just want to reiterate because I fundamentally agree. I've been on a large number of panels where all of the other panelists were just agreeing with each other that we need to build games. We need to stop talking about Web3 games. We need to make sure to hide the blockchain. And then what I'm always thinking is, okay, but then why are you building a blockchain game if no one knows, right? Like why we're doing this, it's like this is not like an easy technology to use, right? We're all agreeing on this. Obviously, that's what Sam's working on. Soon, fully frictionless, obviously. Give it a couple of months or years, but yeah. So fully agree with you, Mike. I think, and I'm as excited as you are to see how different teams will present, because I think that's a good word to use. Like, present the benefits of these technologies to their players, and then obviously how they will react, because that obviously remains a big question mark, especially when we talk about the non-legions in the world.
No, totally. And I was thinking a couple things when Sam was talking there too about, first of all, like, and yeah, I just was in Pocket Gamer talking about this because they're asking, do we need to educate players? And like I said, the analogies of free to play here are just is like endless. It's literally like the playbook. And so one thing, the way we look at it in our game and the way we put it in Mojo Melee and the play pattern is treat it as a sort of reward moment for the player, right? It's not like, oh, when you come in and you sign up. No, it has to like that sort of endorphin, moment when they're excited and like this is a reward, right? Like you've earned this, and that's how we treat it in the game, right? And so whether they've sort of purchased the premium battle pass or bought this as an in-app purchase, that's how we do it. We sell them to them first as off-chain items, and then they play with it to unlock the potential, that if they want to turn it into a digital collectible. And, we were just on a design call yesterday talking about this for the mobile version. And it's just so like, how do you word that, right? To our mentality is like, we're presenting this to a Web2 player that knows nothing about this, right? And how much do you mention blockchain? We have a little thing we have in there now, like benefits, but it's very high level, right? Like ownership and being able to play in our other games with this asset and things like that. But it's as we unveil, minting in the game, which a lot of the Web3 people have been waiting for, and it's about to happen. This is going to get more and more complex. We know that. And yeah, we're also about to unveil this moddable Mojos system that we've been working on, which is an avatar system where now the Mojos can be dressed up and just have infinite costumes and looks. And a lot of the separate items are going to be NFTs too, the hats, the t-shirts and whatnot. And so because we don't want to restrict the Web2 players, right, from playing with all this stuff too. So you get it in the game, and when does it become an NFT, right? Is it always an NFT? What if you put a hat onto an NFT character, but then you take it off and put it on a non-NFT character that you're still working? It gets very complicated. And so we're just trying to think through, every angle as best we can.
You bring up a good point, though, that you should be able to explain the benefits without saying blockchain or NFT. You should be able to just explain, like, you could trade it on a marketplace, or you could take it over to another game. Like, there's no reason you should have to use those words to explain what the benefits are, or you're just playing off those words to make money at that point, kind of.
No, really. And if you think about, that's how I always think about it to the user. And you think about the history of technology, like people don't care what the technology is. It's what does it do for me? People are selfish, right? They just want to, how is this going to benefit me? Right. And if we can't answer that without saying decentralization and blockchain and DAOs, we're done. So that's why we got to kind of, and even, I think a lot of people in this space, ourselves included, for a while, we're just hanging our hats on asset ownership. And that's a tough one, honestly, I think, to sell to Web2 gamers. You have to explain what that means. And when I've had conversations, and I'm sure you guys had too, with any I hate calling them Web2 gamers, right? And I explained to them, like, oh, whatever, this weapon you've got in this game, you could own it and then sell it. Then their eyes, light up. And so that's where there just has to be some informative, discussions with players, so to at least ones who are interested, right? And the other thing that happened in free to play too, right, was that a new generation of gamers came in, and it started to become the norm to them. And this is what happens over time. Us old guys don't realize it, but there's always new kids coming up, And I think as this starts to become the norm to them, right? And they're starting to like just accept it, not like, oh, why isn't it like this? No, I own my assets. I should, right? Like, why shouldn't I? Over time, I think we're going to see that just start to become more accepted.
I think one, because I talk about this a lot with developers, and is this idea of like when Web3 started, we all sort of forgot about like normal gamer segmentation, in the sense that 100% of your players don't need to have crypto, or 100% of your players. I mean, you think about free to play, 100% of your players aren't going to be making purchases. It's going to be more like 2% or 6% if you're lucky. And the benefits of Web3, I think, fall into a similar category where, and because we already see this in free to play, whether it's like CSGO or Rocket League or whatever, you have a subset of players who are like, holy shit, it's so awesome that I can trade this stuff. Everyone else is just like, I'm accumulating it. I don't even think about it. But you've got that handful of people that say, hey, I bought it for $10. I can sell it for $3. Cool. Now I have, $13 in my piggy bank for next month, and that's where you just get into how this extends LTV and conversion, ARPU, and everything else. But I think it's also okay. Again, going back to like what's been possible with technology, I think it's also okay right now for developers to say, hey, everything's abstracted away. Players are going to suss it out no matter what. Like you can't hide anything from gamers, but they don't yet need to know why this is on chain, because guess what? That actually is, a feature that we're rolling out in a year for elder players who are going to be looking for, the next thing. And now there's this secondary market meta, or now there's interoperability with another game. And so I think, ownership is like this thing that we've focused on, but I think players also realize like, hey, you could shut down the game and then I just like own the shit that is useless until someone breathes new utility into it. So I think we're still trying to suss out like what are, and Mike's gone, what are the things that people are going to really latch onto. But I think that's the game design choice. That's just like, hey, in this instant, here's something cool that I think you should do. And I was like talking to Michael Chow earlier this week at Believer, and he's so smart in the way he thinks about like technology and what it lets people do. And his sentiment was, this always starts with, how do I do something faster, easier? And then the next step of that, and the one that really is the only one that matters, is how do I make a game more fun with this technology? And I think we're just starting to get to the point where we can really say, all right, now design is focused on what's the net new experience that Web3 can drive, but still have it be seamless.
So you guys know I'm a big fan of bold and hot takes. And so one hot take that I have, just kind of half baked, is I truly believe that the vast majority of gamers don't care at all about real ownership. And so I think that we're not going to be able to convince them to get excited about Web3 games by telling them, oh, it's decentralized and you can pull it out of the game, because these people don't care. And to me, it's a similar experience. Like, I've been in crypto for a while now. I was in crypto before Ethereum became popular, and it was all still about like owning your own money, right, with Bitcoin. And, in the West, people don't realize what it is to like not own your own money truly, and to be able to get blocked by a bank of doing transactions. Like, everything just works. And so we don't really understand the need for this. But then if you go to like countries in Africa and South America, it's a whole different story. People really realize the value of these things. And so the problem that we've had is that, gamers haven't really felt the need of real ownership, because everything kind of always has been smooth. And so, yeah, my bold take, which might not be really bold, because I see you all nod, so maybe you're all in agreement that gamers don't really think real ownership is that important. And so, to me, my speculation is that we will need to see other benefits presented to the gamers to get them really excited. Curious what those will be, and I'm here to learn.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, you could definitely take the mentality that the ownership thing is sort of a solution looking for a problem, right? Because you have so many gamers playing these games. Who's complaining? You know, that these are on centralized servers and Blizzard is in control of my ass. It's like there's no outrage in the streets. But I think that is going to become sort of just important and accepted over time, because I think there is sort of just that, like, at least for me, when I had this epiphany about this space, and it's sort of like, you know, thinking back to that a couple of years ago, it's like, oh, wait a minute, like the next generation of gamers is going to grow up realizing that, you know, they sort of, we were had, right? Like we just rented all this stuff, you know, and there's this like, it just feels like it's the natural evolution, right? And I think sometimes, like, in society, right, you see these powerful ideas, they just sometimes take a little bit of time to seep in, you know, like, and so I think certain things, at least where I am, I feel like it's inevitable. As you know, I think there was a stat I read a couple weeks ago, like over 75% of like big game companies are now making Web3 games. And I think as like the bigger games come out that are using it, and it's happening, right? Like Summoner's War and other games are putting this in. It's just very subtle. And players are going to start to understand that part, that it is that they at least have a fundamental right to own their assets, and they should have that choice. Does owning these assets have to do more? Of course it does. Yeah, and that's where all the other sort of the fun stuff comes in, and sort of owning them, being not only to play in other games, but have sort of like what we've done even in the Web3 space. Hey, if you own this NFT, come into our game, we'll read it, you get an extra perk. It's like great for cross promotions. But really on the transaction layer, I think that's where it's the most powerful, you know, and commerce, as marketplaces and games emerge, that, you know, you think about a game like Magic, right? Magic the Gathering, like a physical game where the cards weren't really worth anything at the beginning. But as the game becomes more popular, right? Like then people look back and they, wow, if you can find this one card, I think that's just has to have games that break out here that people want to play. And it's taking time. You know, it takes time to make games. There are some great games coming, but, you know, there are still hurdles here, right? And that's, you know, some of these games I look at in this space, which are some of my favorite games, big AAA games, I still wonder, how are you going to get these to the masses, right? Because Steam dominates that space for the most part. And what you're seeing is, like we were just talking about, is Web3 games kind of taking out all the Web3 just to get on Steam, right? To bring in part of that audience and then hope to maybe move them over. So there's still hurdles here. Yeah. And yeah, I think we have to show players what the benefits are, and it has to be clear. I don't think everyone's going to, you know, recognize it immediately. I think it's going to take time.
I think right now the idea of asset ownership being pretty much defined by resaleability is just kind of bullshit. It's not really ownership. And I want to kind of use the example, like one of the examples you gave, like of Magic the Gathering, right? So like there's card games, right? Like, so when you buy physical board games, right? You don't, when the game shuts down, you don't have to mail those back to the company. And like, there's a lot of times when you think, oh, well, that doesn't mean anything. And I think I've seen a trend over the last maybe 5 or so years at least, where trading card games, when they get shut down, traditionally that was it. They were dead, like, right? Because the company's not supporting them anymore. That's just it. Like, you just, they're in a closet now. Maybe I could sell them to a collector later who's like just looking for nostalgia. That's not the norm anymore. The norm now is people make their own cards. They'll continue it. Android Netrunner has like this whole second life. I saw the Transformers card game that like barely even got a life from Hasbro, like, get a second life. There's a whole division of people out in the Bay Area just making new cards, running tournaments, creating whole sets. That's closer to true ownership, where where you could go, I don't care that you shut down the game. It's not shut down for me because I still have the pieces. I could still extend it. I could still, technically they could do that right now, but no one's really doing that with NFTs, and licensing not being attached to it. We get like the F1 Delta time kind of scenarios, those kind of situations. If ownership isn't more meaningful than just a receipt that's on a blockchain, then it's bullshit. That's where we need to go. We just need to step that up. Otherwise, you're not going to convince anyone it's a benefit to them if there's like, well, I could sell it to someone else for less than I paid for it. So,
yeah. I mean, there was that Project Loot. I'm not sure the current state of it. You remember that? And I thought that was a really,
Nico remembers.
probably, yeah, I think it was like ahead of its time in many ways, and maybe it didn't do it quite right, but there's something there, like in terms of like giving players the pieces and then letting the community make the experiences and the games out of it. That's kind of like a little bit like the NFT version of what you're talking about, right? Where they were sort of given, I mean, in that case, it was just words, right? But then you saw like the graphics and things. I just haven't checked in on it recently. I don't know what happened to it, but yeah, one of the many projects of that era that was like, what? I remember when I first saw it, I was like, okay, I give up. You know, here we are trying to make this most beautiful, gorgeous art we can and 3D characters. And then, oh, we just needed to print a bunch of words. Okay.
Mike, if you want to get updated on Loot, you just listen to our previous episode that aired 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
just
We
go
are
out
on top of
pretty
that.
I will.
I can assure you. Good.
I think,
Awesome.
Devin, what you were just talking about, though, you know, is also something that I think has been a little bit of a challenge in this space, because, you know, you're describing the natural evolution of gamers gaming, as in like, hey, this was sort of the initial attention of these games and items, but now we're taking it in a new direction, which always happens, right? Like, I'm going to strap C4 to my, you know, ATV and launch myself to the other side of the map. Like, there's always sort of that, you know, that hack or that extra thing that players figure out. I think part of the problem with Web3 is, you know, some developers have tried to like initiate that way too early and as like a top-down thing. Like, hey, by the way, community, you should be doing all these things. And players are like, I don't want to do that. That's not interesting. And so, you know, not only is it a distraction from like the primary gameplay, but it's just this like force-fed thing that no one gets. And so again, coming back around where it's like, hey, because you don't have to, you know, only onboard 5,000 people because it's so hard to do, and, you know, everything else that comes with, you know, the old school friction of Web3, like now that you can throw that out the window and say, come one, come all, I think it does shift the opportunity for developers back to that core gameplay, then pushing the envelope with, okay, what's the net new experience that Web3 unlocks? And then expecting or anticipating or being okay with the fact that players are going to figure out something else to do with this. You know, whether that's maybe something not great, like an arbitrage opportunity, or something a little bit more productive and interesting that could happen like 2-5 years down the line. But I think we need to go back to kind of taking a breather and being like, hey, I need to focus on this, and gamers going to game. They're going to figure out what to do with it.
Well, we're supposedly living in this age of like moving into UGC, and that's everything all of a sudden now. And I like to give you like a good kind of hybrid sort of digital physical example, which is like Skylanders or Disney Infinity, where it was like these physical things that were like essentially like a physical NFT. They were NFC, but it was, they would unlock a digital asset by having physical possession of it. And a similar kind of idea, right? But eventually those games stopped, right? Especially Disney Infinity, right? Where they just like shut it down. You could still kind of get like this sort of like really botched collection version, but it's basically done. You can't take those and be like, cool, I could go to like discount stores and find those and like buy them cheap, but it's like I could play like the old console game experiences with them, but it's not truly unlocked for me. It's not really this asset that I could take elsewhere. And I was like, those are like a perfect example of what should be like the way we think about it. Is I've got a thing that's a toy as well that I could do whatever I want with in something else. And if we're living this age of UGC and sandboxes and stuff, why can't I just take my NFT into Roblox? Why can't I take it into Fortnite Creative? Like, these opportunities where it's like there's already gamers wanting to do these creative things that you're talking about. Like there's obviously not the main audience, right? But there's an audience that wants to push this stuff forward. But we're not really like unlocking that. It always has to be these big negotiations and like licensing deals. And obviously IP is a huge blocker for this stuff. But it's like you see people like Yuga Labs trying to like attach ownership rights to things like that. We can do this. Like obviously legal is a little tricky, but I think there's opportunity we've seen for this stuff, and also we've seen where it's just not like been squandered. And obviously, TCGs are a hard space to do that with, right? But like physical toys or miniatures or things like that are much easier. And I've seen like the rise of like miniature agnostic games too, where people are like, hey, you're tired of playing Warhammer? You could actually play all these other games with your Warhammer figures. And because it's like just rules, like they're not going to get sued by Games Workshop because they can kind of like not say the actual names. But it's still like this, that's where we should be going, I think, with NFTs, if we want to say like you actually own them.
Well, and I think that, you just hit on something that is, again, I think the net new experience that no one's really tapped into yet, which is how do, let's say, the original IP owners of any licensed content make this worthwhile for them beyond just the initial minimum guarantee and royalties and so on. And so like what you just said, okay, Disney Infinity, and you've got this stuff, like Disney's lost track of you. They have no idea, what Devin loves, why he loves it. And so, they're not in a position to say like, hey, bring that figure to, the park and we're going to give you 10% off a day pass or something like that. But you can do that with Web3, and they can do it, separate from needing to coordinate with, Fortnite and say, hey, I need to serve an ad in Fortnite to anyone who's bought a Star Wars skin because now, we're going to give them some kind of benefit. You just have, they have access to audiences in a way that they haven't done before. And I think that's like also a huge opportunity for games, particularly games that are working with licensed IP, because suddenly, that you might be part of this like infinitely expanding utility ecosystem that you don't necessarily have to manage, but you can be the beneficiary of. And we're not there yet, but I think we're getting to the point where companies are going to understand that. And that, I think, is going to be the thing where gamers are like, oh shit, this is cool. This is an extra experience that I didn't think was possible. And it'll just be easy. They just show up with their backpack and everything's taken care of.
The thing about I was going to say the thing about interoperability, like when everyone talks about it, I think they have this utopian vision. I do too, of like, oh, I'm just going to take my character and bring it into every game. And when you talk to engineers and people who make games, you start to see veins pop in their head because that's not easy. But like a while ago, we realized like there's a much easier way to do interoperability. I mentioned it earlier, and it's sort of just like treating NFTs almost like a ticket or a pass for people, right? It's like what blockchain is this central operating system, right, for everybody that everyone can tap into and use, versus like, oh, we're just on the Xbox store and doing it there, right? Like this is any game that's utilizing this, we can say, hey, Phantom Galaxies, okay, for your holders, if they come into our game, we'll read that, right? Just because it's that central or decentralized technology, and have a benefit, unlock something like you're talking about, or if you have a Superman character in another game and there's a deal worked out, you come into our game, well, now you have that, like a cape or whatever on our character. Those things I see happening in the shorter term than utopian interoperability, which hopefully I'll live to see.
Yeah, we don't need utopian for it to at least be a benefit, right? If we've got a receipt, attach some licensing to that receipt.
Yeah, we've seen Bored Ape do this kind of stuff with other projects, and Digi Daigaku, they were doing it a little bit at the beginning. We want to do more of that stuff.
I agree, full-heartedly agree. With this, we've come to the end of the episode. You guys just kept on talking. I couldn't stop you because you were so excited. Obviously, me too. So I really appreciate that. Devin, Simon, Mike, thank you so much for joining. This was a really good conversation. We've been going very deep on the blockchain. Been talking about loot and on-chain games and stuff. And so it's good to bring it back and talk about, millions of players instead of hundreds of players. So appreciate you coming on, and hope we can do this again sometime. And listener, thank you if you made it till here. If you did and you liked it, let us know. Follow these people; they say smart things, and we hope to speak with you in the next episode. Ciao.